you'll all have to bear with me.
Just picture me naked.
I already am. You all are naked, so it's okay. So just give it a minute to warm up. How many people are familiar with WebSockets? How many people are developing applications that they're making money from using WebSockets? So it's mostly experimenters, right? That's what I know. So this is an HTML5 group, right? But WebSockets actually aren't part of HTML5. That was one of the first things that I learned. They were removed from the specification a few months ago, mostly due to security issues, and they're starting to rework the spec, and it just doesn't really fit with the general idea. Even still, I think it's an important new technology. So I just want to talk about the agenda, what I want to go through today. Just really simply, this isn't a deep dive technical talk about WebSockets. It's not, we're not going to build an app together. I'm more interested in what are the opportunities that this type of technology are bringing to the surface. What are people already doing instead of using WebSockets? Because that's probably what we're going to have to do until they get widely adopted into different browsers. So in terms of an introduction, you all know I'm Cameron from Big Bang Technology. You might not know, though, I'm a designer and a developer as well. So I don't just focus on the technology side, I also have to focus on the design side. That puts me in an interesting position because when I look at something like WebSockets, it's not just, oh, how does it work? It's, well, what does this enable? Why are users, what are users going to get out of a technology like this? You know, is it actually even worth exploring? So I work for Big Bang Technology. We build rich internet applications. WebSockets are really interesting to us because the types of applications we're interested in building are front-end heavy, they're rich experiences, they're online games, and that sort of thing. You can get these slides at this URL. I'll make sure it's available on the Meetup site, so don't worry about having to take notes or anything like that. So the quickest overview that you could ever see for WebSockets. This is basically all WebSockets are. This is the JavaScript client. I'm not sure if you can see because of the reflection. Effectively, all a WebSocket is you connect to a server, you open the connection, you set up some listeners, and when the server sends some data, it fires one of those callbacks. That's basically all you need to know. The real fun part comes in when you start to design the messaging infrastructure from your server. What messages do you want to respond to, and then how does that behavior change your front end? You know, is a user connecting? Is a little Mario character jumping? Is the volume turning up on your network application or something like that? A really simple example of a server would be just a really simple Node.js WebSocket server. Effectively, all you're doing is you're piggybacking onto an HTTP server, setting up a socket connection, and pushing down messages to any of the clients that are connected. So just with these 26 lines of server and client code, you can get started with WebSockets. So this is a really simple example. It's a piece of software that we built called BigBoard, and it uses WebSockets as a to-do list application. We use this to stay in sync at our company. Everybody can load this up and jot tasks on it, and they instantly appear. When you get completed, it synchronizes. And this took me maybe 5 hours, 10 hours to build it. It really wasn't that much work. So why did that take me 5 or 10 hours when historically a networked real-time application, everybody's seen Google Docs, those sorts of things, they have huge engineering teams working on it. That's one of the main value propositions of WebSockets is you don't have to deal with all of the crap. It's a really simple connection. You don't have to use browser plugins. You don't even have to use Flash or anything like that. It just sort of works, right? So let's just pretend we're in a world where all the browsers adopt WebSockets and we can use them to our heart's content. What are some of the opportunities that gives us? So I think presence is one of the most important factors in WebSockets and in sort of the next generation of web technology. This is one example. Chartbeat is a real-time analytics dashboard. You can see exactly how many people are reading your blog posts. You can see where they're scrolling on the page in real time. So they're not using WebSockets right now. If they were to switch over to WebSockets, what would be the big benefit? Well, they would have lower latency, they'd have less bandwidth costs. It would be easier for their developers to program because their developers aren't programming for multiple browsers. Again, that's where they're going to be going. They're going to save a lot of money, and this type of thing will be easier for one developer to build. So Farmville, real-time gaming. Everybody loves Farmville, but they just rebuilt their whole front-end client using HTML5 for iPhone and iPad devices. It uses WebSockets in the back end because that technology is natively supported on those devices. So that's pretty amazing that just using straight-up web technology is one of the most popular games in the world. I think 200 million users or something ridiculous like that is using Farmville, and that's a WebSockets technology now. Continuous controls. Traditionally, the network web has been very discrete, where you send a message, the person receives a message. We always think of like chat rooms and that sort of thing. But what about video game controllers as a network device or something like that? With WebSockets, you're getting those, for basically out of the box. You don't have to do a lot of work to control the latency using that technology. So I found this company, Brass Monkey, and they're using that to have the iPhone as a game controller. I thought that was amazing. So what are some other design opportunities? What have you guys seen that really blew your mind and you thought was amazing in terms of WebSockets? I asked this question on the Meetup group, and I saw one person sent me a link that you rotate and tilt your phone, and it actually rotates a 3D object on the screen on the computer. And just extrapolate that out to you controlling a full interactive experience. Has anyone else seen anything else like that?
With event planning and tracking for organizers of events, especially large ones, conferences and whatnot, to know where people are and interact with them online.
Yeah, that's a great idea, exactly. So how about anything else?
The RC control plane they sell in drugstore. You can tilt and then the actual RC can actually.
Yeah, so I mean, something like that could be built with web technology, right? It's like you have an RC controller, like a helicopter, and you're literally just controlling how it moves by rotating your phone. I think that's pretty amazing that us as web developers, we 5 years ago were building banner ads, and now we can build RC control automation software with the same technology. It's pretty awesome. So we can talk about more of the design opportunities. That's, I think, sort of what the reason that we're all here is. The technology is one thing, but it's like, what are we going to build with the technology, right? So in terms of the development opportunities, in terms of the technological things, Ian Pixie, he's the head of the HTML5 spec. He said it best. If you're going from kilobytes of data to 2 bytes, and you're going from 150 milliseconds of latency to 50 milliseconds, think about that on a massive scale for a company like Google. That sort of starts to show some of the motivations behind a technology like WebSockets. It gets pretty obvious how much money and time that's going to save at those scales. And that sort of shows why they're driving this technology. It's so much faster and leaner than the protocols that were established for something that was never intended to be this dynamic. So some details about the technology. It's backed by all the big vendors. Even though it's not adopted by all of their browsers, WebSockets is being developed by Opera, by Mozilla, by Apple, by Google, and even Microsoft has committed to, or they're talking about building it into their browser. So everybody's talking about it. There's really no reason not to use it. It goes through firewalls, proxies, routers, all that sort of thing. It's a very low impact protocol. It's not supposed to be something that, again, you have to worry about. You should just be able to use it just like you use HTTP. I really like this diagram because it really shows how much you're saving by using WebSockets. At the top, you can see polling, which is you going back to the server and saying, hey, has anything changed? Hey, has anything changed? Hey, has anything changed? Right? Every single second or whatever your server can handle. That's how a lot of these real-time applications work. We're starting to see more applications work on this metaphor where we just open a connection up and say, hey, let me know when something changes. But then as soon as a bunch of changes start to come down, you fall back to the same pattern of, okay, what's next? Okay, what's next? And you're constantly having to go back and forth from the server. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth. With WebSockets, you're connected. Jason made a really good point earlier that you have some other considerations. If you're trying to open up a server for 1 million people, there isn't 1 million ports. So you're going to have to start scaling up horizontally in your architecture, building more servers, but it's still that's a small price to pay for the efficiencies you're getting with the technology. And I'm sure there's more development opportunities that we can talk about. There's definitely other savings that you're going to get. So what are some of the risks of a technology like this? We've talked about how it's not available in the browsers. So adoption is one of the risks. So there's usually ways around these sorts of things. There's one library called Socket.io, and what that does is allows you to, in the browsers that you have WebSocket support, use WebSockets. In the browsers that don't, use some alternative like Flash or long polling or strictly normal polling if long polling is not available. So those kind of alternatives really help to mitigate the adoption risk. Security. So this is the big one. This is the reason that a lot of the browsers have turned off WebSockets by default. The real reason has nothing to do with WebSockets being inherently flawed. It has to do with a proxy issue where the browsers, they've actually had the issue for years and years and years, and the WebSocket technology just brought it to the forefront. Basically, it means that one server can infect the cache of another server's local storage on the client. And I don't really understand exactly why it's a problem, but it's been there for a long time, and until they figure it out, they're not going to enable WebSockets. To date, nobody's actually exploited this in Chrome or Safari, any of the browsers that have WebSockets enabled by default. And again, you always have the fallbacks to develop against. Can anyone think of any other risks to using a technology?
Actually, this is related to security. Is the fact that you can go through firewalls or bypass firewalls or proxies or whatnot, is that not a security risk?
Perhaps. I mean, if you can do that over HTTP, what's the difference? Do you see?
I don't know. I don't understand that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, so WebSockets are still bound by the browser sandbox, right? They're not going to grab some files off your hard drive without your permission and transmit them through the firewall for private corporate information.
Okay.
So really, the browser sandbox is the thing that's really securing you. And I think that's the reason that WebSockets travel over the ports that they do. And they don't use something fancy because they don't have any inherent permission over the other types of protocols that you have inside your browser already. Can anyone else think of any risks?
Well, I mean, we were talking about social risks, which kind of go beyond like the technology problem. But if you have like the ability to have such strong real-time connections, then you can have situations, in, particularly in countries that aren't as developed as we are, maybe not as free in terms of media and stuff like that. Like you can see why countries or like there are sort of nationalistic risks as opposed to just technology risks. And I think a lot of times the companies are sort of they fall. They're beholden to those governments, and so that's one of the reasons why they have to limit their browser's ability to do certain things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you can't start a socket server up on a web browser. Yeah, you still need a server somewhere, right? So even though this does enable things like peer-to-peer communication, there's still one throat to choke. So I see that there's definitely, we're moving in that direction. We're becoming more decentralized, but there's still a single coordination server that's required. So the social risks, from like a political standpoint, you go after the person who has the socket server. If, say, we invented some BitTorrent, protocol or something like that, I think that that's definitely something that's manageable.
Is there possibilities, and perhaps not on the risk side, but opportunities for opening up some form of live streaming, almost like drawing in Canvas live, rather than bypassing things like video tags? You'd be able to actually draw directly in Canvas using obviously WebSockets to basically just pass through RGB values to a plane.
Yeah. So the question, just so everyone hears, was would you be able to take a WebSocket connection and just pass straight visual data through to a canvas? And I've already seen demos of people doing that sort of thing. So absolutely, I could see there being some sort of rudimentary video protocols or audio codecs traveling over WebSockets. Obviously, the problem is how fast can JavaScript really process this stuff over the wire right now? And I think the answer is that we're working on it and it's getting faster. Right now, I don't really know the answer to it, but I'm sure there's probably people here who can tell us that, either way.
I actually have a question just about security, just before you go.
Sure.
Does it actually traverse over SSL, or is it only HTTP?
That's a good question. So there's two versions of the protocol. There's one that travels using TLS, just like an HTTPS connection, and it uses the WSS prefix. So it's WebSocket secure. So it's got the exact same restrictions or inconveniences of HTTPS. So
does that have a lot more overhead to it though, or is it pretty much just over a different, like?
Well, I mean, the types of overhead you get with encryption are when you send a transmission, you're encrypting that actual transmission, and when you're decrypting it on the server side, there's going to be increased CPU load or something like that. What a lot of the cloud providers have started to do is provide dedicated decryption hardware, or decryption and encryption hardware. So when you're using SSL over, I don't even know if Amazon has this yet, but you send a transmission and it actually delegates the decryption to a piece of dedicated hardware, so you're not really seeing an extra load. But if it was in software, then definitely you're going to see some hit. But
is there a data overhead though that you know of, or?
I think that there's some sort of a data overhead, but I don't know how much it is. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how much but it is supported out of the box for sure.
And is it supported as well as over normal HTTP, or like in the browsers? Do the browsers have the same support for the SSL version?
Yeah, the browsers have the same support. Okay. So the browsers that support WebSockets support the HTTPS version or the WebSocket secured version. It's not like, some browsers have half support. It's because everybody's on board. It's a very consistent API. It's not like it behaves half in one browser and a little bit different in another. It behaves the same in all the browsers that it's enabled in, which is good news for us, right?
Cool.
So, just to wrap it up, there's obvious opportunities with WebSockets in both design and development. You can take an existing application and make it a lot more efficient by using WebSockets. but you can also design fundamentally new applications that weren't possible before. There's also risks in both ways as well. And as any new technology, we have to consider the risks and the opportunities from as many angles as possible in order to make the best decisions. So I'm personally excited about the opportunities. As a business, we're investing in research in how we can use this, as exampled by Bigboard and other things. So the other thing is Bigboard is open source. We just actually turned it to that today. And if you want to take a look at an HTML5 app, see how it works, and see how we're using WebSockets, you can take a look at this on GitHub and fork it and start it up on your own server. We use Pusher as a third-party intermediary. They provide an abstraction to the socket services so that if the browser doesn't support it, it falls back to Flash or something like that. And so you can check out Bigboard just by going to your mobile phone or your laptop right now. I think there's a 10-user limit on the package we have right now for Pusher, but it would be very easy to switch that over to your own custom socket server. So take a look. It's really interesting because we're using Backbone, and it's an HTML5 native app, so or whatever that means. So that's it. So the format normally is that we have a discussion afterwards and we just mingle. Does anyone have any specific questions for me though, or before we get to that? Yes.
So you mentioned this Pusher app thing. What does that do? What are the alternatives? It sounds like that's a